Shuangjie heavy abuse of pets heavy forceful teasing heavy youth cookies heavy physical incontinence. His unrequited love during school came to an end, and he met her again on the university campus. He decided to muster the courage to chase her back, but he didn't expect the female lead to be more proactive than him. Dianan. Can your body handle what you want so strongly? Yanhai. For you, what is your body? Chapter 1. He blushed when he looked at me. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. On this day, the mock exam results of Art Education High School were announced. Mom, my English grades are out today, and I ranked first in the whole grade. Dianan's face was filled with joy, and she called her mother as soon as she got home from school. After working hard for many days and nights, I finally achieved excellent results. Now, with high standards and strict requirements, my mother should not be picky anymore. What is the specific score? A cold tone of disapproval from Yanhai came from the other end of the receiver. Dianan's inner joy and anticipation were extinguished by this sudden cold remark. She trembled as she pondered in her heart the source of her mother's indifference towards her, pondering how to respond in order to win her mother's favor. The maximum score for the high school mock English exam was 150 points, and I scored 149 points. Dianan nervously and cautiously answered softly. Where did that point go? How could you be so careless? Did you study well? You should know that your brother used to get full marks back then and never bothered me. Yanhai frowned and scolded her daughter arrogantly. Why did you mention your brother again? His scores were all changed by himself, and he even imitated your signature. In your eyes, even if I got first in the province, I still can't compare to your precious son. Without waiting for her mother to respond, Dianan hung up in a fit of anger. Upon seeing this, Yanhai slowly took off the rubber gloves used for household chores and placed them gently on the stove. She came to Dianan's side and gently asked her, "What's wrong? Did you have another conflict with your mother? Is it about grades? I heard from Shuangjie today that you got first in the exam." "No, you got first in the whole grade." "That's amazing." Upon hearing Aunt He's enthusiastic praise, Dianan's mood suddenly changed from gloomy to sunny, and her furrowed brows relaxed. Aunt He still loves her the most, knows how to comfort her the most, and cares most about her feelings. Although Aunt He is just a part-time worker at home, she is her best confidant at home, knowing every detail of her worries. Whenever she is ostracized at school and gets angry with her mother and brother at home, it is Aunt He who comforts her at the first time, gives her warmth, and resolves her heartache. Ding dong. The doorbell suddenly rang. Dianan seemed to have received a secret signal and looked at Aunt He with alertness. "Aunt He, I'll go open it. You should be busy first." She hurriedly ran to the front door. Aunt He nodded in response and smiled knowingly. At this time, her son Yanhai should be picking her up from work. Dianan glanced at the mirror hanging on the wall before opening the door, checked her hairstyle, and briefly organized her instrument. Her heart rate quickened for a few seconds. She took off her school uniform jacket and was wearing a light blue shirt and a checkered school uniform short skirt. She ran away in the middle of the way with rabbit toe slippers, stood barefoot, and wore beige short socks on her pure white calves. "Hi, you're here." Dianan's eyes flickered with a crystal-clear luster, pretending to greet the person outside the door naturally. "Hi." Yanhai glanced at her and turned his gaze back to the corner outside the door to study. "Please come in." She felt his eyes as deep and hazy as a lake. The sculptural high nose bridge is very prominent, her fair face exudes a charming healthy luster, the corners of her mouth tremble slightly, and her slender and straight body is bathed in the sunlight, dispelling the darkness in her heart. He watched her walk barefoot with a hint of joy into the room, followed closely behind and into the kitchen. Dianan opened the refrigerator door and took out a box of 3-color ice cream to eat. "Shuangjie, you need to learn from Dianan. If you have nothing to do, ask him for more English tutoring. And he looked at her son with a friendly expression. I will consult her if needed. Are you busy? Yanhai responded calmly. Do you have anything urgent? And he stopped, half unbuttoning her apron and looked at her son. He shook his head unnaturally, exhaled a breath, indicating that it was nothing and continued to wait quietly for his mother. I'll hang up the clothes washed on the balcony and it's over, and he looked at him thoughtfully. He nodded, put his hand in his pocket, and watched his mother pass by as he climbed the stairs. Do you want to eat? There's still a lot in the fridge. Su Dian licked the spoon and looked at him. No need to trouble, thank you. He leaned nervously against the edge of the stove, his palms slightly sweating in his pockets. He would only say a few words to his mother when picking her up, but they were the most familiar strangers in the classroom. Most of the students in the class don't like Su Dian, and he also chooses to distance himself from her at school. No one knows about his mother's hourly work at her house. I am the first one in English this time, are many people going to be jealous and cry? Su Dianan boasted with a contemptuous tone. You're really amazing, everyone feels inferior. He pretended to be indifferent and looked in the direction of the window. My IQ is indeed at the level of a top student, she excitedly demonstrated her advantage as an excellent student. Do you need me to tutor you in English? And he often mentions this to me, asking me to give you some advice. She continued to test his reaction. Not for now. He was afraid of being stared at by her like this, especially since her tone of voice always made him unable to grasp the true meaning behind her words. His ear tips are getting redder and he can't control his restlessness. Due to her arrogant temperament and aggressive handling style, there are hardly anyone close to her in school. Her father passed away in a car accident during her freshman year of high school, causing her only spiritual pillar to disappear from her heart. She became surly in temperament, hating her mother, brother, and everyone at school except for him. She didn't have any companions to accompany her to and from school. She went to the cafeteria to eat, ignoring the sharp gazes around her. She sat alone, chewing on a variety of dishes, while the girls next to her chatted and mocked her loneliness. All of this not only did not disgust Yanhai, but he was also unconsciously attracted by her attention. However, he never dared to show it because once he was detected, he would be discussed by everyone. He is very worried that his situation at school is as difficult to establish as hers. She could talk to him loudly in the classroom as she pleased, proving to everyone that she was not completely isolated, but it would make him feel extremely embarrassed. She knew she wouldn't do anything like that. It's already satisfying to have a few conversations with him in his white mansion. Do you have anyone you like in class? Su Dian suddenly asked her soul curiously. No. Yanhai emphasized loudly, even frightened by his intense reaction. But I saw you chatting with Lin Li very enthusiastically after school, are you chasing her? How could it be? I was just discussing with her the writing ideas for English essays, and she's not my type either. Su Dianan nodded, as if she had received some special reward, and a hint of joy rose in her heart. Why do you all think I like her? More than one person is so suspicious, he felt puzzled. Because when you talk to her, your face always turns red, but what everyone doesn't know is that you are born to love blushing. In physical education class, your face turns red from the sunlight, and when taking notes, your cheeks show a noticeable blush. When playing football, your blood boils, but when talking to a female teacher, you constantly feel shy. It's always easy for you to talk to the opposite sex like this. These are all what I have observed. He instinctively rubbed the tip of his nose and responded with an unnatural expression, really. I just found out I have this trait. For example, your face is now very red. She focused on looking at the boy in front of her, not missing any opportunity to make eye contact with him. Every glance seemed to penetrate his heart. His ear tips are getting hotter and hotter, and he wants to suppress the uncontrollable heat flow in his body, but he always finds it difficult to control himself. He was both embarrassed and enjoying the fact that he was often seen through by her. All the disguise was transparent in front of her, as if only she paid attention to the true thoughts behind his every move. You probably hate me staring at you like this. But I don't have anyone else to communicate with, only you are willing to talk to me, even if it's just here. She suddenly lowered her face and became a bit gloomy. I have never disliked you, Shuangjie. He was frightened by her sudden decline and wanted to save the situation in front of her. So he solemnly strengthened his tone, as if stating an unchangeable legal rule. This sentence instantly raised a cloud of joy in her low expression, and she looked up at him, right in front of his eyes. His eyes flickered frantically, and he nervously shifted his gaze to another place, but he could still feel the fervent passion emanating from her burning gaze towards him. He inexplicably attached himself to her and stayed in a private space, a place that only accommodated the two of them. In the secret conversation that happened here, which belonged only to the two of them, there were some incomprehensible emotions that filled each other's hearts. And he came down the stairs, and as soon as they heard the footsteps, they tacitly withdrew their gaze from each other. She returned to the stove, tidied up her things briefly, and turned to her son to say that she could leave now. Thank you, and you've worked hard. Shuangjie looked at her with a smile on her face. She happily shook Dianan's hand and glanced at Yanhai walking over from the stove, instructing, say goodbye. Oh. Goodbye. He glanced at Shuangjie and quickly withdrew his gaze, saying to the floor. Before she could respond, he turned the door switch and walked out. The next day when he came to pick up his mother, Dianan had just taken a shower and was wearing a light purple bathrobe to open the door. The tail of her long hair was still dripping, her cheeks were still red with steam, and her skin was white and red, delicate and transparent, as if she had applied cream. The door that was not closed was blown open by a gust of wind. Seeing Yanhai's figure, she stopped on the stairs, unsure if she was walking or stopping for a moment. You came a little earlier than usual today. She seemed a bit flustered and disorganized, but covered it up in time. He dared not scrutinize her closely, afraid that her face would turn even redder. He only caught a glimpse of a pale purple figure with a faint fragrance in the afterglow, hurriedly passing by his eyes and entering the dressing room inside. He was thinking, would she carefully choose which outfit to wear to meet him? Her temperament at home is very different from that at school. At school, she was often teased by conflicts with her classmates, and her clothes were always stained with ink and oil. And every time at home, she dresses very cleanly as a lady, with a very outstanding temperament. The premise is that she doesn't stare at him and doesn't speak. Shuangjie finally came out of the closet, but he had already walked out of the door with him. She felt a bit disappointed. Did he not even care what she would wear, or did her poorly groomed appearance after taking a shower scare him? And he sat in the back seat of her bicycle and patted her son's back, saying, "Do you have anything urgent? Just take me and walk outside." "No, I see you've already packed up. Isn't it good to go home early and rest? Remember to say goodbye to Dianan next time. She's quite difficult at school, take care of her more, you know. Can we change the topic?" And he gave him a thud in anger, looking both amused and crying. Chapter 2. He is very handsome on the court. You are listening at novelfull.audio. There is no class this afternoon. Shuangjie is very pleased. But when she learned that the reason for the suspension was that the school football team was going to hold a game and the other students were going to watch, she found it very boring. She didn't like physical education and sports, nor was she used to gathering with so many classmates who didn't like her to participate in class activities. A group of girls cheered beside her. I heard there was Yanhai. I didn't expect the school grass to join the school team. It's really a combination of talent and beauty. Shuangjie was attracted by their screams and was even more heartbroken by the names they said. It turned out that he was a member of the school team, hiding quite deep. She stood up straight in the audience and poked her head out, searching for everything about him. The sky is sunny and there are no signs of any changes, making it very suitable for playing football. The teachers encouraged the students in the audience to wave flags and shout, while Hao Man and a few girls around him screamed passionately, cheering for the boys in our class. In no time, the girls were all extremely excited, and the host was introducing the players on the field. A team center, Yanhai. Dianan immediately hit his position and saw him standing on the green field in a white and blue striped jersey, with the number 6 printed on the back of the jersey. Dianan felt a slight warmth in her heart, and 6 was her lucky number. Her gaze was fixed on his figure, and he seemed to be the most handsome among all the players. His graceful and slender figure presented a unique fitness vitality. He shyly waved to the audience and his body language became much more active than usual. The whistle sounded and the game began. His every move was captured by her eyes. When his teammates passed the ball to him, his agile body ran back and forth in a graceful posture. Make gestures with your hands and work closely with your teammates. Sometimes I stop to observe the game, hold my chin in my hand, as if thinking about the next step of playing. 80 minutes have passed, and my teammate brought the ball to the right side of the field. As he looked around, he decisively passed the ball to Yanhai. Yanhai kicked the ball fiercely, only to see it pass by the goalkeeper's left hand by a tiny margin, spinning rapidly towards the net and scoring. The audience immediately boiled, and the girls screamed for him. Hao Man excitedly took Dianan's hand, and the intimacy driven by victory dissolved their distance from each other. Yanhai and his teammates hugged each other excitedly, and they lifted him up excitedly. Dianan was startled by the noise and froze. She, who was accustomed to being quiet, found it difficult to adapt to such occasions. However, this time she enjoyed it because she had someone she liked on the court, and watching him play was a pleasure. In Chinese class, Dianan looked out the window at the green lawn in a daze, recalling Yanhai's handsome performance during the competition that day. Dian. Where are you looking? Focus. The Chinese teacher glared at her angrily and shouted. She was frightened by the sudden sharp voice and was at a loss for a moment. After regaining consciousness, she realized that the teacher was staring at her. Is there any text outside the window? You stare outside and can't learn anything. The teacher scolded her mercilessly. You're so lenient, I don't have much to learn from you. You keep staring at the blackboard without getting distracted, that's a fool. She was angered by the teacher and blurted out. Yanhai secretly observed all of this, turning his pen and casting his worried gaze towards her seat. The classmates were surprised by her bold speech and began to whisper and stir, all looking like they were watching a good show, standing aside from her and no one standing on her side. The bell rang for the end of class and she was called into the office. After being scolded by the teacher, she walked out of the office. She felt extremely depressed. For her, it is foolish to wear school uniforms every morning and recite loudly in the noisy classroom. She couldn't even decide which direction her eyes would turn, nor could she decide which direction she wanted to see. She felt disgusted with school rules. Coming towards him was Yanhai, who hesitated whether to step forward or not. After a brief inspection, there were not many people around and he breathed a sigh of relief. He slowly approached, looked at her with a sympathetic gaze, and spoke with concern, "Are you okay? The teacher didn't embarrass you, did he?" Her breath began to fluctuate as the two of them got closer, and her face almost turned red like him. She, who has always been bold, also has an uncontrollable shyness. No matter how she punishes me, I won't keep it in my heart, she said calmly, with a hint of unwillingness in her eyes. Teacher Zhang is not targeting you, she is a reasonable teacher. But I know you are not wrong, your eyes can see out the window, and you have not violated any rules. Thank you, Yanhai. She looked at him gratefully, feeling a surge of heat in her heart. After returning home from school, she had a sudden idea to put on light makeup. In just over an hour, and he will be off work and she wants to change her face to welcome Yanhai. She sat down in front of the dressing table, carefully observing every detail on her face. Cheeks are plump, lines are sharp, eyes sparkle with a deep luster, but the skin is not very red, and lips are starting to turn white. She suddenly felt that it didn't make sense to put on makeup for such an occasion, afraid of making him feel embarrassed. After all, he often showed awkward expressions in front of her. She stroked her bangs in front of the mirror, circled a box of round lipstick with her fingertips, and then applied it evenly to her lips, making them appear rosy and full of vitality. I used a smoke gray eyebrow pencil to slightly fill the loose area of my eyebrows along the shape of my eyebrows. She felt that this was just right. She felt thirsty and went downstairs to the kitchen to pour water. It was only when she saw the leftover kitchen waste that she remembered, and he was on vacation today. At this moment, the sound of the TV suddenly startled her. It turned out that her brother Su-sun was lying on the sofa with a hangover. He kept changing channels and angrily pressing the buttons on the remote control. The stench of alcohol began to spread, and she couldn't help but cover her mouth and nose. She tiptoed and carefully removed her coat by the sofa, preparing to escape home. Su-sun raised his flushed eyes, glanced at her sideways, and asked in a scolding tone, "Where are you going? Why do you panic like seeing a ghost every time you see me?" "No, I'm going for a walk outside," she said perfunctorily. "Where is outside?" She was too lazy to pay attention to him and looked at his shabby appearance, which was full of alcohol. She quickly put on her coat and walked towards the main door. Su-sun suddenly became interested and bounced off the sofa, chasing in her direction, ready to stop her. "Humph, you don't have any friends. Who can you see when you go out? Poor bastard." He mercilessly mocked her. "I don't have any friends, but who I see has nothing to do with you," she responded calmly, trying to suppress her anger and not provoke him. But the residual alcohol in his body quickly made him lose his sanity. He grabbed her arm and violently pulled her hair, ignoring her loss of balance and falling down, dragging her body into the room, which couldn't stand up. She wanted to scream but couldn't, her throat tense for a moment, wanting to cry without tears, as if it was PTSD. She allowed him to tug at her, and there were gradually many bruises on her neck, arms, and waist that had been pinched by hand injuries. She silently endured them, and her suppressed tears could no longer be suppressed. She burst into tears. "If you let Mom know, I'll make it difficult for you to eat and walk around, understand?" he warned, squeezing her neck hard. "No, I won't," she struggled to breathe and broke his fingers with her hand. "I'll just go out and get some air, and I'll be back soon." He gradually regained consciousness and let go of her hand. She took the opportunity to push open the door and darted out. The door was quickly thrown open, swinging back and forth in large amplitude, making a piercing and clicking sound. The cold air outside suddenly penetrated her body, and the warmth wrapped in the thickness of a jacket was difficult to keep warm. She began to tremble, her teeth couldn't help but tremble up and down. She unconsciously trotted along the street, and the area of her body that had been scratched was constantly throbbing. The cold wind poured fiercely into her neck, and the howls of the wind were mixed with her crying of collapse. She didn't know if there was another version of her in the parallel world. If there were any, she would definitely be loved by everyone, rather than being as miserable as she is. Although she lives in a big house, there is no home in her heart. Her fingers trembled uncontrollably as she took out her phone and stared at the familiar number with determination. She pressed the wrong number several times before finally dialing out. Chapter 3. Getting Closer. You are listening at novelfull.audio. "Hello, is that Anan?" And he answered the phone, wondering if there was anything wrong with Dianan calling at this point. "Ah, and it's me." "No, it's nothing, just because you didn't come today, I miss you a bit," she said vaguely, unable to organize her language. "Anan, why is your voice so weak? It's still outside on such a cold day." Go home early and don't freeze. Thank you, I understand. I'm fine, don't worry. She began to sob and pressed the red hang-up button. She doesn't want this person who cares about her to worry. The sky gradually darkened, and raindrops as big as beans gradually descended on the earth. She was instantly soaked by the rain. The storm made her panic. She looked around helplessly, and could only run towards home helplessly. She stood alert outside the yard, observing the situation in the villa. In the garage, only my mother's car was parked in the parking space, and she guessed that my brother should have gone out to continue getting drunk. She finally calmed down when she mentioned her throat, carefully avoiding the accumulated water and mud on the ground, and walked straight towards the front door of the house. Her head began to feel dizzy, her wet body couldn't stop trembling, her head became heavier, and she was on the verge of losing consciousness. She didn't know how she walked up the stairs back to the bedroom, and when she woke up, it was already the morning of the next day. The classroom supervisor was checking attendance by name. Tang Junyu, arriving, Hao Man, arriving, Ji Yanhai, arriving. Su Dian, Su Dian. There was no response, and the teacher did not hesitate to cross the attendance sheet. Although Su Dianan's grades are among the top, on par with Ji Yanhai, the teachers clearly prefer the popular Ji Yanhai. Ji Yanhai looked at the class teacher's slightly furrowed brow and thought to himself, why didn't she come today? Is it related to the phone call her mother received yesterday? The more he thought, the less calm his mind became. He didn't pay much attention in class and was reminded several times by the teacher. After school, he deliberately came early to pick up his mother from work and stood foolishly in the living room. Although he was very anxious, he remained silent and occasionally paced back and forth in the living room. And he saw him like this and immediately noticed his caution. She walked over and patted her son's shoulder, instructing him, an Anfa has a high fever. Rest in the bedroom. You can bring her the medicine and water. That's the room with a picture of the sea pasted on the door. He suddenly understood and took the medicine box and water cup seriously, afraid of overturning them. He walked up the stairs step by step with a restless heart, and deep in the hallway, on the door of the second room on the right side, hung a beautiful poster in the style of Instagram waves, which should be the one. He knocked lightly on the door, but there was no response inside. He slightly increased his intensity and knocked, and inside came several heavy coughs, which were getting closer and closer. He instinctively took a small step back, and the door slowly opened. Su Dian rubbed her haggard eyes, her face pale, and she squinted at him with a lethargic expression. She asked weakly, "Who is it?" After calming down, she regained her sight and exclaimed in surprise, "It's you, Ji Yanhai. Why did you come?" "You didn't come to school today. I came to pick up my mother, and by the way, I'll see what's wrong with you." He tried to control his awkward words, as if afraid of being seen through by her. "Oh, thank you. Are you holding the medicine for me?" "Oh, by the way, yes, you can take it and eat it quickly. You come in, it's okay. Let's not keep standing at the door talking, okay?" Okay." He followed her into the bedroom, where the whole room was covered in blue-green wallpaper and had very few furnishings. The space was spacious. A 4-piece blue-gray bed, a minimalist dark green bookshelf, and a dark blue double-door wardrobe. The pure white sheer curtains swayed gently in the wind, and the wooden desk had irregular rings of natural wood attached to it. He stood in the room, quietly gazing at the neatly arranged books on the bookshelf. The button on the collar of his shirt loosened at some point, and his tie hung down on his chest. She sat by the bed, swallowing medicine and drinking water, and asked him, "Which book do you want to read? I can lend you anything. Do you have Thoreau's Walden Lake? He nodded in agreement, his eyes searching for the book on the shelf. She put down her water glass and got up to the bookshelf, rummaging beside him. The height difference between the two was very obvious, and she happened to be at the tip of his nose, about 15 centimeters apart. In her opinion, this height difference is perfect. Her gaze fell on the spine of a book, and in an instant, a gust of wind blew through the window. The 4 words, Walden Lake, caught her eye and she found them. She handed the book to him, and he took it and flipped through it. You are very different from the boys in the class, they are not interested in reading. They think reading is too boring, so why not go see the class monitor from the next class to get excited? To be honest, every time they whistle to the class flower, they bow their heads straight, Dianan joked disdainfully as her fingertips glided across one of the rows of spine books. He paused for a few seconds, pondering the meaning of the sentence, they sometimes look quite hungry, and I also find it a bit indecent. But you still followed behind them and didn't draw a clear line with them. She suddenly turned her head and looked at him blankly. He seemed to be caught in her serious gaze and instinctively lowered his head. They haven't done anything out of line, they're all friends, there's no need to get into such a standoff. You don't quite understand me in this regard. He suddenly became cold, his face turning from sunny to gloomy. She stared at him, and he deliberately turned his head to look at the spine of the bookshelf. Why do you say I don't understand you? She asked stubbornly, her hand hanging down from the spine of the book. He didn't want to answer her question and fiddled with the book in his hand. She looked at him with a casual expression and felt a bit disappointed. In his eyes, she was just an outsider who didn't understand friendship. And he is about to finish work, you should go back now. Thank you for sending me the medicine. I want to rest now. She began to resist his presence in her heart, and her body suddenly became weak and tired. Don't talk to the school about me coming to see you, okay, he said tentatively. She seemed to have expected him to say so and sneered, don't worry, no one pays attention to me at school. Her heart was throbbing with blood, and he really cared more about those friends who set her apart and helpless. He left her room. She collapsed on the bed, collapsed behind her, lifeless. Perhaps he is right, after all, those people are his backing in school, which is something she cannot understand without a friend. She actually forgave his cruelty and pain. After all, this is the person she likes, and she must compromise for his ideas. The next day's break, she was bored flipping through newly issued math papers in her seat, and her classmates were playing around her, making waves of playful noises. Everyone's face was filled with smiles. A few orioles stopped on the branches outside the classroom window, chirping non-stop. The sharp bell for class suddenly rang, and the trees by the playground were stacked one after another. The sky was so gray that it felt like crying. Each class is very lengthy. Notebooks are filled with markers left by different colored highlighters, and pen bags are stacked with different brands of water pens. Throughout the entire afternoon, as expected, Yanhai didn't say a word to her, nor even looked at her. Looking at him sitting at the other end of the classroom chatting and laughing with his friends, I don't know what he was talking about so happily. Anyway, it's not about her. During class, he comfortably turned the pen while reading the blackboard, ignoring the gaze she cast at him. The secret conversations that belonged to them were deeply buried in her heart, like old things that had been sealed in dust for a long time, falling several layers of dust. And he took a few days off, and Yanhai didn't show up for several days. On a Tuesday, and he came to work and he also came early to pick up his mother. He didn't wear school uniform and changed into a blue hoodie and sports pants. Su Jian quietly opened the door for him, and she didn't want to face him directly. She ran anxiously upstairs. She closed the bedroom door, buried her head in a pillow, and breathed rapidly. She didn't know how embarrassed he was to pretend to be a stranger to her at school, but at her house, he naturally talked to her as if nothing had happened. The most hateful thing is that she was asked not to mention their friendship to others. What exactly is she in his heart? Is it a string puppet that comes and goes as soon as it's called out? She was silently resentful when suddenly there were a few intermittent knocking on the door. She knew who it was and who else it could be, but she didn't want to pay attention to this person. This person with an unclear attitude towards her will only continue to play tricks on her. The knocking on the door rang out again, and she sat up and said, "Come in." She responded expressionlessly. The door was opened with a small gap, and Yanhai poked his head in a bit, as if confirming whether she really agreed to let him in. "Come in," she said to the desk without looking at him. After he entered, he gently closed the door and kept his eyes on her expression. "Are you angry?" "What makes me angry about?" He lowered his head and walked slowly to her bedside, then sat down. She hugged her knees and moved a few times to the other side of the bed, her hands involuntarily caressing the hem of her skirt. They remained silent for a while, and he supported the bedside with his palm, gradually approaching her. She could feel subtle changes in the surrounding air, and a throbbing sensation surged inside her body. Shuangjie, Shuangjie. This child was still here just now, where did he go? Suddenly, Yanhai's voice came from downstairs. He quickly retreated and said, "I have to go back, my mom's off work at midnight." He blushed and quickly left the bedside, and soon he heard the sound of him rushing downstairs. She remained in place, savoring his lingering warm breath, gazing at his departing figure in confusion. Suddenly, she felt her empty heart filled with something, and this wonderful feeling was truly addictive. An hour later, she fell asleep in the dim room, her phone screen lit up, and a WeChat message popped up. 88, Jijia Street, this is my address. Chapter 4. The Most Familiar Strangers. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Dianan was drowsy and quickly rubbed her eyes. She looked at the words on her phone screen and confirmed that the news came from Yanhai. She pondered carefully what this guy was thinking in his head, and what did sending his home address mean. "Why did you send me the address?" Puzzled emoji, "Can you come to my house tomorrow after school? My mom went to my grandmother's house, she's rarely not at home." She was pleasantly surprised by the sudden invitation and began to set off fireworks in her heart. But she quickly calmed down. "Wait a moment, why doesn't he go to his house with me after school? Are you afraid that our classmates will see us walking together?" "Oh, no matter what, as long as we can be alone with him, it's good." She doesn't want to delve too deeply and find it boring. She was wearing a Korean-style autumn round-neck sweater in beige, a gray knee-length gauze skirt, and wine-red short-sleeved leather boots. Before departure, she took a hot bath, shaved off her leg and armpit hair, and applied a light-scented moisturizer. She specifically sniffed her armpit and applied some anti-sweat body ointment there. The fragrance of her whole body mixed with the body fragrance of her skin, which was very refreshing and pleasant. She doesn't know why she needs to do these things, but she feels uncomfortable not doing them. 30 minutes later, Dianan walked off a bus. She stood on the street near Yanhai's house and found the specific location of the community according to the address he gave. Happiness Jiayuan. She arrived at the entrance of the community and saw Yanhai standing at the door to greet her. The tall figure of 187 is wearing a miscellaneous sports suit and slightly dirty sneakers. After seeing her, he nodded slightly and didn't say anything before turning and walking towards the community. She followed behind him all the way, walking very slowly. She observed the scenery in the community. Buildings and rooms of medium height were filled with greenery, surrounded by outdoor fitness facilities, and many parts of the equipment were rusted. To her right was a parking shed for an electric scooter, with several holes in the roof. There were many stray cats and dogs littering the trash cans on the roadside. The entire residential area looks very outdated, and the environment is definitely incomparable to their villa area. She couldn't believe he lived in such a place, but she didn't show this idea on her face all the way. Unconsciously, she arrived at the entrance of his unit and followed him upstairs silently. He took out the key and opened the door. Before letting her in, he glanced over her and down the stairs, confirming that there were no others behind them. There is a small window in the narrow bedroom, with dim lighting and simple furnishings. A single bed against the wall, a desk with a corner full of extracurricular books, posters of football superstar Messi pasted on the wall, and many simple storage boxes filled with books on the ground. The bookshelf is too small to hold so many books. Dianan doesn't feel very cramped, because in this kind of space, she can naturally come into close contact with him. They are discussing which school to fill in for the college entrance examination. Yanhai filled out the English major at Dae University, but he is not quite sure about this choice. Dianan filled out the philosophy major at this school, which she is most interested in. She looked at his hesitant expression and couldn't help but say to him, "You should major in Chinese language and literature. You love reading so much, and this major can best showcase your strengths." Really? It seems difficult to find a job in this major after graduation. He looked at the blank space on his application form in confusion. "I heard there are many girls in this major, so you definitely don't have to worry about getting married." He burst out laughing and said, "I didn't go to college for that. Anyway, it's not easy to find a job in any major right now." He chose the literature major she suggested, and she smiled at his face. When she was at school, as usual, she seemed to have no connection with him at all. She sits in her seat copying English words and even quarrels with her classmates next to her. But he restrained himself from looking at her and continued to pretend to be indifferent to her, without any interaction with her. The secret exchange between two people is like a cup of boiling hot water, with hot air rising and requiring people to keep an eye on it, because an accidentally hot water stream can spill out and scald themselves. While eating in the cafeteria, Yanhai's close friend Yuan Zipping asked him, "I heard from the person in the next class that your mother works at Dianan's house. Is that true?" "Well, yes, it's just a few hours of hourly work every day," he replied awkwardly. "Have you ever been to her house? I heard she lives in a secluded villa area. Is that true?" Yuan Zipping stared at him excitedly. Yanhai casually grabbed the food in front of him and said calmly, "I've only been a few times." "Is she living the kind of life where she wakes up from an 800 square meter bed every day? The kind where your mother has to take care of and feed every meal with her own hands?" "Ha ha ha. There's no such exaggeration as you said. I didn't carefully examine the layout inside the house, it's a big villa anyway." He was a bit annoyed and appeared very impatient. "Have you ever entered her boudoir? Has she ever spoken to you?" Yuan Zipping stared at him eagerly, wanting to know if his relationship with Dian was good or not. "I haven't been in before, don't inquire." He waved his hand and took out a wet tissue to wipe the oily corners of his mouth. "So, she and your mother have a master-servant relationship now. It's not as you think. My mother just goes to her house to clean and occasionally cook a meal. Working hours are very random, and they don't have much communication." He stood up and picked up the unfinished food and walked out of the cafeteria, leaving Yuan Zipping alone. In that afternoon's English class, as he watched the word couple written on the blackboard, he couldn't help but recall the close encounter he had with her in his mind. He never noticed this longing in his heart. He found that he often had some kind of fantasy about her, thinking about her soft lips, thick curled eyelashes, lightly glossy cheeks, and agile eyes. Suddenly, he breathed quickly, constantly adjusting his breath to restore normal breathing rate. After school, he went to her house as soon as possible, but her family was still not at home and couldn't come back until late at night. His brother spent years in the nightclub, and his mother was so busy with work that she almost lived in the company. He walked up the stairs, looked at her lovely face, listened to her speak with a smile, everything felt so wonderful. Dianan is not a stunning beauty at first glance. Some people maliciously mock her as the ugliest girl in the school. But in his eyes, she is the most special existence. He once tried to record his special feelings for her in his diary, in order to understand why he always thought of her. He felt that words could more accurately depict his specific impression of her than words. Her face, tone of voice, aroma of hair, and colors applied to her nails. He looked at her in a daze as she sat at the desk flipping through her homework, her fingers slender and tender, focused on silently reading the words on the paper. "What's wrong?" She suddenly stared at him curiously. "What are you thinking? Why are you so stunned?" Seeing that he didn't react, he continued to ask. "It's nothing, I just lost my mind." He watched as she used her fingertips to pluck the fluttering hair behind her ear. "Did you really fill in the literature major that I suggested? Didn't you want to go to another school?" She looked at him indifferently, with some information mixed in her eyes that he couldn't read. He knew that the other school she was referring to was the local Wenxin University, and many students who didn't want to go out of town chose it. If he chooses this school, he can still maintain his high school circle of friends, stay with friends, and coexist with everything he knows. However, he wants to step out of his comfort zone and go to another university like Dianan, so that his life will undergo completely different new changes. He doesn't want to keep spinning in place, trapping his life in one place. He knows he needs new breakthroughs. What does Auntie expect from her son? She will respect his every thoughtful choice and encourage him to follow his inner voice without being influenced by others, and be happy to be himself. Of course, if nothing unexpected happens and we perform normally, we will meet at Dai University in City A. After all, the literature major there is the best. Really? She couldn't help but frown uncontrollably. "I'm definitely not going to perform poorly, I'm afraid you might have a problem later." She couldn't help teasing him. How could it be? "I am still very confident about my grades." Perhaps feeling guilty, he immediately asked, "If you meet me in college, will you greet me?" Dianan did not respond to him, and there were clusters of white fluff floating in the silent air. He was very panicked because of her silence and anxiety about the uncertainty of the future. Perhaps in college, he would be submerged in a sea of people and no longer be a top student in high school. At that time, he was no longer enough to attract her favor. At the thought of this, he felt an indescribable bitterness and loneliness in his heart. She put down her pen and turned the chair to face him, staring deeply into his eyes. She said firmly, "I will never treat you as a stranger, Yanhai." He suddenly blushed with shame and didn't know how to face her. His lack of communication with her at school made him feel embarrassed. But in front of her, he didn't have the courage to mention this matter. If everyone discovers their relationship, he will be unable to bear the consequences that come with it. He knows he is selfish and a jerk, but he finds it difficult to accept the strange looks of others. Only by keeping this relationship very confidential can he feel secure. He tried to avoid her gaze and didn't want to entangle himself with his chaotic thoughts. He continued to pretend to be completely unaware of everything that was expected in her eyes, knowing that once he met her, he would be completely ashamed and lose the courage to stand in this room. Chapter 5. The First Warmth. You are listening at novelfull.audio. On the way to self-study next night, Dianan walked alone on the pitch-black street. She usually stubbornly goes straight home and never participates in evening self-study, making her the most dashing day student in the school. Recently, everyone has been working hard to prepare for the exam, and the atmosphere is unusually tense. Although her grades have always been excellent, she still wants to be flawless. There is nothing more exciting for her than being admitted to the same school as Yanhai right now. The sky presented a deep and bottomless darkness, and there were not many people on the street anymore. Occasionally, several cars would fly past her. Unconsciously, Dianan walked into a long alley, where the darkness ahead was endless. Under the dilapidated streetlight, a chubby man with a shaved head and two flower arms tattooed emerged from the back with a strong smell of alcohol. He grabbed her hair and shouted fiercely, "Little slut! Come home with me to sleep." She was so scared that she was almost scared out of her wits. She lowered her head and struggled to break free from his thick arms, trembling as she hid in the corner. Let go of me, I'm calling someone." The burly man mercilessly slapped her in the face, causing half of her face to instantly feel a burning pain. The force was too strong, causing her feet to lose balance and be hit against the wall. She lost her voice in pain, tears welled up in the corners of her eyes, and she trembled helplessly. At this moment, another man with greasy long hair appeared from somewhere and let out a lewd smile. He looked at her legs with his eyes narrowed, licking his lips incessantly. He rushed towards her urgently and couldn't help but touch her face, saying, "Second brother, such beautiful eyebrows must be taken back to show big brother. You can't take them home and enjoy them alone. Don't touch me." She suddenly patted his dirty hands with her hands. The man's fingers were covered in yellow and black mud, and he didn't even know where this madman had dug with his hands. His long nails could poke people's eyes blind, which was extremely disgusting. The stench of his palms spread and suffocated. The two men looked at each other lewdly, their smiles gradually becoming wild, and they slowly approached her. She leaned tightly against a wall, her body trembling with fear, but couldn't find a corner to shelter her. She wrapped her arms around herself and said in a trembling voice, "No. Don't come over. If a woman says no, she just wants it. It's so tasteful. I love this one from the bottom of my heart, tsk. I like it too, hee. Ha ha ha, you're so stupid. Why did you hand her over to the big brother? Isn't it more enjoyable for us to share? What second brother said is right. Little brother, my mind is confused. Get out of here." Dianan screamed and pushed away the man closest to her. "Get out of here. I'll give you a chance to serve me, don't be disrespectful," the man said as he loosened his belt around his waist. She shook her head violently, her lips bleeding from biting, and desperately shouted stubbornly, "Someone! Someone! Help!" The man with a shaved head gave a glance to the long-haired man, who rushed towards the coveted prey in front of her like a beast rushing out of a cage. She screamed in despair, "Help! Come and save me!" Just as she was about to be stripped of her shirt and skirt, losing her last line of defense, a brick suddenly flew out of the dimly lit alley and hit the back of the man's head who was lying on top of her. The man couldn't help but howl, "Ah! My head!" The man with a tattooed arm saw the long-haired man unconscious by a brick flying out inexplicably, scared and running away, his body covered in decorations. Dianan, who had already fainted from fear, heard a familiar voice in a daze. "Dianan, wake up, I am Yanhai." He glanced at the torn mess on her body and carefully wrapped it around her body without turning his head. At this moment, Yuan Zipping was scolded by his teacher before being released from the school gate. He complained fiercely about some vulgar language and was caught in the sight of the sudden light from the car headlights. He saw a taxi parked on the roadside not far ahead, and a pair of familiar figures stumbled onto the car. When Dianan woke up, he was already lying on the single bed in his bedroom. The wounds on the arms and neck have been cleaned and drugged. Her face was moist, covered in tears, and she struggled while crying in her sleep. Who would have thought that on her 18th birthday, she encountered this heart-wrenching accident? He kissed her eyes and gently asked, "Are you feeling better? Don't worry, you're safe now. This is my house, and I've already called the police." She nodded slightly, and he slowly sorted her hair, stroking her cheeks. She tugged at the corner of his clothes, gesturing for him to lie down too. Her face leaned against his chest. She felt like a damp and worn-out sponge, being forcefully twisted by someone's hand, and the water in her body kept dripping down. "Have you ever hit a girl?" she asked weakly. "Oh my goodness, of course not. Why do you ask that?" "I don't know either. I'm not those bad people, don't worry, I would never do this to you." He rubbed her shoulder and kissed her hair. Her face pressed tightly against his chest and said, "My dad has abused my mom at home." Yanhai swallowed his saliva and slid his throat, unable to say a word. He remained silent for a long time. Finally, he spoke up, "You must have been very scared at that time," she said, holding her tighter in her arms. "Have you ever been beaten by Dad?" he asked with concern. "A few times." A tear slid down her face. Yanhai choked up again, unable to speak. He lifted her face and kissed her forehead, saying, "I will never treat you this way. You will always be safe by my side, Su Jian." She nodded and remained silent. "I will protect you as long as you are within my sight. Don't be afraid, with me around, please believe me," he promised her seriously. She listened carefully to his warm words, and her frozen heart began to melt with a warm current. This was the first time she had received a certain sense of security from him. She felt that she had never been surrounded by such delicate emotions before. Fortunately, this tenderness did not come from anyone else, but from someone she liked who saved her in times of crisis. At this moment, all her confusion, resentment, doubt, and estrangement towards him were shattered, replaced by unparalleled attachment and full of happiness. She had never had such abundant feelings for anyone in the world before. The more she thought, the tighter she hugged his body, and he gave her endless warmth with his body temperature. Tears welled up again as she felt unworthy of the love of anyone in this world before tonight. But at this moment, tonight, her life seems to have opened a new chapter. This moment is worth remembering and cherishing for her. Years later, when she thinks of it, she will think, "My life truly began to change from this moment." Chapter 6. Men Who Make Mom's Belly Big. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The next day after school, Auntie happened to meet her son Yanhai on her way back from the market. The two of them walked into the house together. As soon as Auntie put down the key, she walked up to her son and urgently asked, "When I was tidying up the sheets for you this morning, why did I find some long hair on the pillow? Your blanket is also fragrant. Have you ever brought the girl back?" Yanhai nodded. "Ah, at your age, you have a lot of thoughts in that area, so you can't control it. Just don't affect your academic performance, I won't ask you who she is." She shook her head helplessly and said with a smile, "Oh, by the way, don't do anything wrong to the girl. I was talking about that, you understand. Be careful." She quickly turned her head to look at him and solemnly instructed. He gave his mother a white glance, as if to deliberately put on a rebellious expression and said, "I understand. I won't touch her. Don't always think so badly of me, okay?" She smiled and took off the kettle on the stove, starting to fill it with water. He leaned against the nearby food counter and watched her. "You see how opened-up-minded I am, I never ask too many questions about you, and I rarely get involved in your life. Just be content." He said angrily, turned around and walked straight up the stairs, ready to go back to the bedroom to review his homework. When climbing the stairs, he could still hear his mother's laughter constantly coming from downstairs. She always grins uncontrollably because she guesses his thoughtfulness. After a while, his mother knocked on the door of his bedroom and gave him a plate of fruit. "Shuangjie, stop writing for now. Put down your pen, take a break, eat some fruit. Mom has something to tell you." "What's going on?" "I went to see your grandmother that day, didn't I?" "Actually, it was to help her with the hospitalization procedures. She has a slight discomfort in her heart and is being taken care of in the hospital. You can come and visit her with me tomorrow." "I'm not going. She always says that I look very similar to my missing father, and that I'm going will only worsen her condition, right?" Yanhai refused with a reluctant expression on his face. "Shuangjie. Why is she so immature? After all, she is so old and not in good health. What's the real difference between you and her as an elderly person?" She looked at her son anxiously. He looked at his mother's worried gaze, his wrinkled face full of fatigue, and recalled the last meeting with his grandmother. Although it was an unpleasant experience, he keenly noticed that her grandmother had really visibly lost weight, her face was sallow, her cheeks were severely sunken, her skin was loose and wrinkled, and she was haggard. He saw everything in his eyes and felt pain in his heart. "Okay, I won't argue with her anymore. I'll see her less once, and I don't want to always hold grudges against her." His calm tone contained deep affection. "Good child. Mom knows you're not someone with a heart of stone and can't explain. All right. You rest well, let's continue to review. Son. Come on. She smiled and patted his shoulder, gesturing to him with a yes gesture. He pretended to impatiently push her, wanting her to leave the room quickly. Okay, I'll go. After speaking, she silently walked to the door and gazed at her son who was sitting at his desk writing for a while, with a comforting smile on her face, gently closing the door. In the city hospital, he and his mother stood on his grandmother's bed, and the nurse at the door waved to signal for his mother to come out. Grandma lay weakly on the bed with a drip, slowly lifting her wrinkled eyelids. She looked at him for a long time before recognizing his appearance. It's getting cold, you're just wearing this little, isn't it cold? The old lady complained slightly disdainfully. What did you say? I said, are you only wearing one sweater over here? Why don't you put on another coat outside? She gradually began to get angry. Yes, oh, yes. I'm not cold, I don't need to wear a coat. He looked around at the patients in other beds in this ward, some were in plaster and some had just undergone surgery. He found that his grandmother was the oldest among them, but fortunately her condition was not the most severe. The nurse walked in and changed the medication for Grandma's drip bottle. Perhaps the nurse brought in a gust of air, and the patient on the right side of the hospital bed suddenly coughed violently. Mother followed in and put the congee bought from the canteen on the bedside table. Are you letting him wear this little? Grandma looked at her sideways and scolded. Oh my God, the sun is shining outside, it's not cold at all, it's very warm. My mother quickly explained. Grandmother sighed, seeming to find it difficult to accept her view of the weather. It's mostly me who's old bones, and my bones are getting less and less able to withstand the cold. The old lady carefully scrutinized Yanhai from head to toe, looking dissatisfied with his expression. You are really not like your mother at all. Let your mother have a good look. This face is exactly the same as that bastard. It makes people angry. The old lady suddenly became irritable, as if she was ready to be angry at any time. Yes, you're right, I really look like Dad. He tried to restrain his pent-up anger, after all, it was in the hospital. Don't call that bastard Dad. Have you forgotten that he made your mother's belly bigger and left when she was 17? Grandma was indignant and her eyes were about to widen. The other people in the ward were frightened by the sudden roar and turned their heads to stare at the three of them. The nurse instantly stretched her face and warned them in a rebuking tone to keep their voices down and keep quiet. Yanhai and his mother have no resemblance in appearance. Mom's head is naturally curled, with soft facial features and unclear edges. The male students in the class often praise his mother for her looks like a movie star and her temperament. She may really be as good looking as her classmates say, but he doesn't feel regretful because she doesn't look like his mother. His hair is straight without any curvature, and his face has a distinct contour. In his grandmother's words, it looks like a fugitive from a certain angle. However, he understood that his grandmother did not really dislike him. What she hated was the father abandoning their mother and son, and she could not forgive this irresponsible man. So every time she saw him, she would always get angry uncontrollably, and he silently endured not to confront him. He knew that her elderly family genuinely cared for their orphans and widows from the bottom of their hearts. As for who the father is, no one knows his identity except for his mother. No one knows where he is now, and at such an old age, Yanhai has not actively inquired about his father's whereabouts and background. My mother said to him, if you want to know about your biological father, you can ask me anytime. I won't hide anything from you. But he always said to her nonchalantly, this man with no news will always live in his grandmother's anger, in his ruthlessness towards you, and there is no place for him in my heart. His classmates always attach great importance to their fathers, either by following their example or resisting them with various rebellious postures. Thinking of this, he suddenly recalled Su Jianan's words. Even if her father rapes her mother at home, even if she has been beaten by her father, she still misses her father's love so much. This makes it difficult for him, who lacks fatherly love, to understand. He wandered between various relationships, becoming anxious about gains and losses, and worked hard to maintain his hard-earned circle of friends. Dianan once envied him and said, "You are very friendly to your friends, and everyone likes you. Your good social connections really make me jealous." He particularly hopes that she can say this to her while her mother is working, so that her mother will be more at ease with him. He wanted his mother to know that even without his father's guidance, her son did not give up and become a scumbag like his father. In the afternoon, my uncle and aunt also came to see my grandmother and asked which university Yanhai wanted to attend. After learning that he was applying for the Department of Literature at Dae University, they all gave him a thumbs up. It's just that this premature praise made him a bit uneasy, and he was a bit resistant to the polite way between relatives. If he really gets accepted, tuition fees are the biggest concern for him. Although the comprehensive level of this university is among the best in the country, it is still a bit difficult to attend due to their family's economic conditions. Even if he applies for a full scholarship, he must work part-time to successfully complete his studies. He didn't want his mother to spend most of his savings on his studies, which would make him feel guilty. After all, his mother was already frugal enough, and he didn't want her to lower his living standards for him. He also had some regrets because the literature department was really not good for employment, and it was more like a major that people with minds at home would choose, but he had no interest in other majors. This Sunday afternoon, Dianan took the initiative to come to Yanhai's house to do homework, saying it was homework, but in fact, she just wanted to stay with him. Since he saved her from fire and water that time, she likes him even more. "Did your mother really stay at the hospital today and not come back? Did I come too recklessly?" she asked, slightly worried as she took a glass of water from the press-on kettle in the kitchen. "Yes, she went to the hospital early this morning to take care of her grandmother. She can't do without people around her." At that moment, they heard the sound of a key entering the lock at the door. Chapter 7. Am I not worthy of her? You are listening at novelfull.audio. The door was opened, and the person entering was Aunt He. Dianan instinctively hid behind Yanhai. Aunt He bent down, took off her leather shoes, put on her slippers, and noticed a pair of unfamiliar women's coconut sneakers on the shoe rack, without showing much fuss. As usual, she silently put down the key and walked straight towards the kitchen carrying 2 large plastic bags of fruits and vegetables. The sound of footsteps getting closer and closer made Dianan very nervous. She wanted to find a hiding place, but found no place to hide. "Oh my! It's Dianan here, Shuangjie. You're such a child. Dianan didn't even tell me in advance when she came to be a guest. You see, I bought all vegetarian dishes today. You guys play for a while, and I'll go buy some delicious cooked food." Wait. And he seemed to have anticipated that the person who arrived was Dianan, warmly greeting her with a smile. Dianan's face suddenly turned red and she said, "Sorry to bother you, Auntie. Oh, I wish you could come here every day. Why are you still so distant from Aunt He?" "Well, Aunt He, there's something else at home. I'll go back first." After finishing speaking, she glanced at Yanhai and ran out without looking back. Before Aunt He could react, her figure had disappeared. Yanhai watched the two of them communicate in a daze throughout the entire process, silently watching her run out. It wasn't until the door was quickly closed with a loud bang that he realized it. His mother's mouth was twitching uncontrollably, and it was very difficult to hold back her laughter. "Come over, help me put these 2 bags of things in the kitchen refrigerator," Mom instructed with a smile on her face. He grabbed his head, took out the items from the bag one by one, placed them on the countertop, sorted them, and placed them separately in the refrigerated and frozen areas of the refrigerator. "She doesn't need to run so quickly when she sees me," she said. "She came to play with you, and I'm very happy." I really like this child. He watched his mother roll up the empty plastic bag and put it into a storage box specifically designed for paper bags. Do you think the place I went to today is a hospital? Mom looked at him with a wicked smile. He observed her playful expression, paused for a few seconds, blinked, and shifted his gaze to the unused plastic bag on the table that had not yet been rolled up. I know there will be guests at home today, my mother continued. Guess what? Her mother asked me to work temporarily, so I asked your uncle to take my place at the hospital. I didn't see her coming to greet me like usual. Her mother said she went out to play. I guessed it roughly. He didn't speak and nodded silently. I guess you must really like her, right? She fixed her eyes on her son, closely observing his expression to prevent missing any clues. Why do you guess so? Because you and she enrolled in the same university. He suddenly realized, his face turning increasingly red, and his hands fiddling with the plastic bags in confusion, making a loud noise. My mother laughed happily when she saw his self-conscious and shy appearance, and his voice was so loud that it was outrageous. Then I'll change to another school, okay, he said inexplicably in defiance. Come on, study hard, and don't miss your beautiful promise. Mom suddenly became serious and gave him a hopeful look. He looked at the situation with a determined gaze, as if expressing his determination to pass the exam. Have you two officially talked? You still need to be careful at school and not let the teacher worry. Mom suddenly worried. No, we're not the kind of relationship you mentioned, he quickly explained, afraid his mother would misunderstand. So, you didn't touch her, did you? Don't do anything wrong to her. She glared sternly at him. You asked too many questions, right? I don't need to tell you all of this, it's my privacy. He was a bit impatient, feeling stimulated by his mother's inappropriate words. He put the eggs in the bag one by one into the egg trough in the refrigerator, then took out a bottle of peanut oil from the bag and placed it near the seasoning rack of the stove. Is it because I work at her house? Mom whispered, do you think our family's conditions are better than hers, one day at a time? You've thought too much, I didn't feel inferior in front of her. She never showed any signs of looking down on me, he said, feeling a little uneasy as he passed by his mother. He seemed to suddenly realize the disparity in family conditions between himself and Dianan, and was angered by this economic gap. He even worried that his mother's words would be true, and began to suspect that his poor self would be looked down upon by her. Mom, do you think I don't deserve to be with her? He remained silent for a long time, breaking the silence and looking at his mother with a skeptical gaze. I don't know either, but I believe Dianan is not the kind of person who despises poverty and loves wealth. My mother was a little shaken in her heart, and she instinctively comforted him. Do you mean that her mother will look down on me? He continued unhappily. Does her mother know that you are friends? When you went to her house, did they ever look down on you? Her mother asked in response. All right, I don't want to discuss this topic with you anymore. Please don't tell anyone about her coming to our house. If rumors spread, it will affect my studies. I went upstairs to study. He walked up the stairs without looking back. My mother looked thoughtfully at the back of him slowly passing by, hesitating to speak. After he went upstairs and returned to his room, the sound of the door closing was louder than before. The loud bang brought him back to reality from his anger, and he was surprised that he was so easily influenced by his mother's intentions. He lazily took out the simulation rolls from his backpack and laid them out on the desk. The words on the scroll began to overlap in his eyes, becoming increasingly blurred, and he couldn't concentrate at all. The more he forces himself to focus on reviewing, the more he becomes distracted and disoriented. He began to get restless, so he threw his pen out and dragged his heavy steps to the bedside to sit down. Unconsciously, he had no concept of the passage of time and just sat there. He kept thinking about himself and Su Jian in his mind. He thought of the day when Fa Xiao asked him in the cafeteria. It seemed that not only Yuan Zipping thought that his mother was her family servant. After all, as long as he knows something, in no time will the whole school know. When he thought about the master-servant relationship between his mother and Su Jianan's family, he felt uneasy all over, afraid that it would become the reason why his mother said he and she were not compatible. In order to regain some psychological balance, he comforted himself that even if her family was wealthy, they were not happy. My father passed away early, and my mother hardly paid any attention to her, nor did she have a close relationship with my brother. She told him that she had no attachment to home, and for her, that villa was just a place to eat, sleep, and do homework. I don't know if what she said to him that night was true or not. Did she say that she was beaten by her father when she was a child to gain sympathy, or was it true? But he also understood that she didn't need to lie about such things, and it was even more likely that the truth was more serious than what she had said. He suddenly realized that he seemed to be the only person who knew about her worries, and that he was connected to her inner secrets in a way that confused and unsettled him. This was a psychological burden for him, and it was difficult to calm and digest in his heart. The next afternoon, math class had just finished. He was tidying up his notebook and stationery on the desk when Yuan zipping from the back suddenly patted his shoulder and shouted excitedly at the people around him, "Hey! I know who our school grass girlfriend is. I left school very late on Thursday night and only saw a good show. I saw our Yanhai helping a girl with a confused face and disheveled clothes into a taxi. Although it was very dark, with my amazing eyesight, I recognized her at a glance. Who is who? Speak up. Don't make any fuss." The boys and girls next to them huddled together, excited like wolves, tigers, and leopards snatching lambs. I had already guessed it would be her, who else could there be? Su Dian. Yuan zipping said the name without thinking. As soon as the words fell, there was a commotion in the classroom. What did you and her do that night in Chapter 8? You are listening at Novel Full.audio. The classroom was filled with constant shouts. Did you two go to spar some martial arts together so late? Ha ha ha! Yuan zipping sneered with a lewd expression on his face. Shen Han also anxiously approached Ji Yanhai and said, "What exactly happened? Did you get it?" "No, how could I do this?" Ji Yanhai looked speechless, unsure of how to counter these people. "Why not?" Lin Lena asked with a skeptical expression. "Our whole class knows that the person she likes is you." He was stabbed by her excited tone and dared not look at her, without any response. Amidst the boasting and laughter of boys, she walked out of the classroom with great strides in a fit of anger. Hao Man was drinking soda in the hallway, disturbed by the sound of noise, and occasionally looked into the classroom. When Ji Yanhai's eyes met hers, he really hoped that she could come in quickly to help him break free. "He must be thrilled," Shen Han said confidently, as if he had caught his handle. "This guy is very gloomy and never reveals anything to us." "That's right. There's nothing I dare not admit. She just has an unpleasant temper and an abnormal brain. Dressing up, she still has a unique charm, ha ha ha." Yuan zipping said ecstatically. Ji Yanhai quickly flipped through the books in the drawer, his hands trembling uncontrollably, and his shirt on his back slowly soaked in sweat. "Are you having a problem? What are you talking about? What benefits does spreading rumors about Su Dian have for you?" Hao Man rushed in to break the noise and angrily yelled at the crowd. The more angry she became, the more excited these boys screamed and burst into laughter, constantly encouraging Ji Yanhai to tell the story of that night in detail. He was disturbed by the noise and quickly packed his backpack, but the zipper was not fully closed. He grabbed a corner of his backpack with his left hand and left the classroom with a pale face. Before he could reach the classroom door, he heard the group of people shouting his name behind him, but he didn't turn back. He hid in one of the compartments of the toilet and hung his backpack trembling on the hook on the side. He curled up in this small enclosed space, feeling layers of suffocation in his heart, as if his heart was tightly held by an invisible pair of big hands, suppressed to the extreme. After a while, the message prompt on his phone turned on, which startled him. It turned out to be a WeChat message from his mother, asking him to go to the hospital with her to see his grandmother after school. He slowly put down his phone and touched his face with his hand. His whole face was wet with sweat, and his palms were also sweating. He kept recalling the night in his mind. She leaned weakly against him, and he couldn't help but kiss her in the eyes. Although there was no unusual action between the two, he felt that the scene was very much like being publicly displayed online, repeatedly browsed and watched by many people, as if he was an indelible crime. Thinking of this, he closed his eyes and couldn't let himself stay in such a confined space anymore. He was also afraid of encountering the men from his class in the restroom later. So he quickly pushed open the door of the compartment and ran out. After coming out of the hospital, he finally slowly exhaled the breath he had been holding in his heart. His eyes were sore, and he rubbed them for a while without any relief. Mom stood on the roadside, hailed a car, and turned her gaze towards her son. "What's wrong with you? Are you tired at school today?" she asked him with concern. "A bit, I've been under a lot of pressure lately." "Oh my goodness, your face is so pale and pale. Are you anemic?" "I just looked at your grandmother and didn't notice your expression at all." She looked very worried and gently rubbed his shoulder. He took a big deep breath and looked at the gloomy sky, becoming increasingly uneasy. "Is it related to Yanhai?" She looked at him in confusion and keenly felt her son's abnormality. "I know I shouldn't say these things to you, but I really can't find a second person to confide in. I'm holding back too much," he confided with a tearful tone. "What's wrong? Remember, you can tell Mom anything, we talk about everything, son." She touched his face and comforted him with heartache. "My classmates found out about my relationship with Su Dian and were booed by them for a whole day, which made me feel very uncomfortable. What does it mean to be discovered by a classmate that you have been in contact with each other? Have you never talked to her before at school?" She was shocked and her voice increased a few decibels as she spoke. He was startled by his mother's raised voice, shivering all over, his face becoming increasingly embarrassed, and he hung his head in silence. "I know the people in your class don't like her, shouldn't you also play tricks on Yanhai with your classmates and intentionally ignore her at school?" She roared in anger, and nearby pedestrians were frightened and looked at the mother and son. He remained silent again, as if admitting that what she said was true. He gave up all resistance and couldn't find a reason to defend himself. She glanced at his reaction and understood that what she was saying was quite accurate. "If you don't speak, I'll know I guessed right. Do you know how I see you now? I think you're smearing my face with your treatment of Yanhai." She blushed with anger. "Wait a moment, the car I called will arrive. You can take the car back by yourself. I would rather take 2 buses back home than see you like this. You should reflect on yourself. Mom, do you need to do this? You and my soldiers are going home separately." He wiped the sweat off his forehead and finally stopped silent, speaking. "Mom. Can you be normal, okay? Did you suddenly become so capricious about such a little thing?" He helplessly followed his mother as she walked briskly, constantly trying to keep her. "Just for this little thing? Have you ever thought about it for Yanhai? When I ran into you at home the other day, I found that you were very cold to her. It's you who's abnormal. It's you who has a ghost in your heart." Her hair was scattered by the wind, and she coldly refuted him. She angrily took big steps and resolutely left her son, walking towards the corner of the road. Her shoe heels fell to the ground with a thud, each sound like a tap on the boy's head, as if harshly reprimanding his mistake. After hearing her son's shouts behind her, she was very tired of his repeated calls, so angry that she threw her handbag on her shoulder and walked into the front door of the bus with her head held high. In the blink of an eye, the rear of the car slowly drove towards the distance. He followed the car's tail for a few steps, then gave up in frustration. It seems that his mother was really overwhelmed by his anger this time. He felt that his situation at this moment was very difficult, and couldn't help but squat down and hold his head tightly. He could clearly hear his heartbeat thumping, and the surroundings suddenly became eerie. Every breath he took made him feel extremely foolish. Suddenly, a crow flew over and kept pecking at the discarded potato chips on the roadside. From time to time, it looked up at him and made a rough hoarse sound of, wow wow wow. He felt that even the crows were mocking and spitting at him. An electric scooter passed by, and behind him came a burst of children's laughter. When he turned around, it turned out that the family was walking and laughing with fried skewers and milk tea. A delicious aroma of food floated in the air, but it made him feel a headache. Compared to the warm atmosphere of the family, he appeared extremely lonely. His body seemed to be falling heavily, about to fall into an endless abyss. Chapter 9. What do I count towards you? You are listening at novelfull.audio. In the blink of an eye, it was Saturday again, a long-lost sunny day. Dianan was admiring flowers in the backyard garden of the villa. She picked a rose with dewy petals, sniffed the fragrance of its petals, and walked to the white rocking chair to sit down. She was bathed in the sunshine, surrounded by various flowers around her, and her mood was very beautiful. She was intoxicated by the wonderful atmosphere when suddenly a creaking sound came from behind the door. She was startled for a moment, but didn't look back. She seemed to have guessed who it was and didn't want to face the person who opened the door. The footsteps behind her were getting closer and closer, and Su Sun's impatient voice came from beside her. Why are you sitting here alone? I didn't do anything, I won't be attending class today. I'll be resting at home, she replied in a perfunctory tone, unwilling to respond to him. I heard Yanhai say that his younger brother saw you go home with the man that night. Let me tell you. I know that man. He suddenly approached her, saliva almost sprayed on her face. She moved her body in the opposite direction to him, gave him a sideways glance, and ignored him. I'm talking to you, why are you pretending to be dead? He began to get angry and stared at her with a threatening expression on his face. Since you know him, can you tell me who he is? She asked, pretending to be very curious. Are you in love with Yanhai? He questioned her with an arrogant tone, his gaze fixed on her face. How do you know him? My friend Yanhai and his younger brother Yanhai often play football with him. They pulled me to compete with him in football skills. He is truly a member of the school team and has good skills. Yanhai also told me that he is the son of our servant, ha ha ha. What kind of servant? You know how to drink and fool around every day. Even he often comes to our house to pick up his mother from work without knowing it. She looked away in disgust. I just haven't met him at our house, but I can recognize him. Yanhai told me that this kid is not bad, but he doesn't talk much. He approached her again with a mischievous smile on his face. Oh. I'm not in love with him, you don't have to gossip. I have something else to do, I'll go back to my room first, she responded coldly, standing up and preparing to leave the garden. Su Sun's face changed instantly upon seeing the situation, and he put on a sharp and unpleasant look, his eyes turning red. He rudely grabbed her shoulder with his hand, causing her to ache and let out a scream. The strong sunlight shone on her face, making her unable to open her eyes. As the pain on her shoulders intensified, she became increasingly dizzy and gave up struggling helplessly. He saw her body gradually weaken and released his grip on her hands, sneering contemptuously, "You're really boring." He walked out of the garden, slammed the door open, and slammed the doorknob heavily. She was frightened into tears by the loud door noise and silently looked at the shattered petals on the ground. In the afternoon, she arrived at Yanhai's house and he went to the hospital. She wants to talk to him about Yanhai's teasing in class that day. She walked into his bedroom without greeting him and sat expressionlessly by his bedside. Seeing her suddenly look like this, Yanhai sat face to face with her at a loss. Are you interested in Lina? She finally asked him. No, it's just friends. Friend. What kind of friend? It's definitely not a friend like you and me, right? She suddenly sneered. She and I just enjoy discussing topics and have no other interactions. What's wrong with you today? Why did you suddenly ask her? He felt puzzled. You can have a public speech with Lina at school, but what about you and me? What do I count as your own? Our relationship has been passed around like a joke in school. She couldn't help but choke and buried her grievances with a sad expression on her face. I know you've been dissatisfied with the way I treat you. I'm sorry, I made you feel uncomfortable. He didn't know which expression was appropriate, his hands resting on his legs and tucking into his pants. It's okay, I don't care about these things, she suddenly regained her composure and said in a distant tone. I just hope you can tell me that if the person you like is her, you can be honest with me and not deceive me. Okay, I promise you, I will be honest with you and won't deceive you. But obviously, you're not just worried about this issue, are you? Dianan shouted sternly, so what do you think I'm really worried about? He was stunned by her shout, and she slowly lowered her head, staring at her fingers, her cheeks getting redder and redder. He didn't know how to respond to the current situation and remained silent. Finally, she laughed helplessly, feeling that the boy in front of her, despite knowing everything in his heart, still chose to ignore her feelings in an almost cruel way. She was fed up with his gentle personality. Afraid to openly ubiquitous hiding, as if she was his least visible shame. She decisively walked out of his house and returned to her own home, sobbing and sleeping until she forgot the time. On Monday morning in the classroom, her seat was empty and she didn't go to school. She was too lazy to deal with the strange looks in the class, the teasing of the boys, the endless jealousy of the girls, and the forever indifferent coward. She lay in bed, recalling all the uncomfortable experiences she had at school before, feeling in her heart that even if it weren't for this kind of thing, she was already tired of it all. She should take a leave of absence at home before the college entrance examination, as she had confidence in her own abilities. She nests in the dimly lit bedroom every day, pulling the curtains of the room tightly together without any hint of light. She makes the white noise of rain or campfire every day, only turns on a small lamp on her desk, forgets to sleep and eat, memorizes vocabulary and does test papers, and only goes out of the kitchen to soak in a bucket of noodles when she is hungry to the point of stomach pain. She is so tired that she fights with her eyelids and even has angina that she is willing to climb onto the bed to rest for a while. Her mother was busy with work until late at night and often ran into her in the kitchen looking for food. She found that the lights in her room were still on at 3 or 4 o'clock at night. At first, her mother didn't take it seriously, but later she started pounding her door angrily. Even if the door was smashed and banged, she remained indifferent and pretended not to hear, continuing to write papers and copy words. My mother threw all the instant noodles and other fast food in the trash can and yelled at her to roll back to school for class. Auntie kindly sent her food, but it was all ruined by her mother. She still goes her own way, no one can force her to go to school. As she grows older, she becomes even more stubborn, and no one can control her. My mother stood in a standoff with her for a few days and reluctantly handed over her application for leave of absence to the homeroom teacher. She ignored her affairs and continued to live in the company for meetings, rarely returning home. Today is her 3rd week off from school. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, she made a test paper and made a gurgling sound. She didn't eat breakfast or lunch, and her stomach couldn't hold on anymore. She came to the kitchen and wanted Auntie to get her something to eat. Auntie bent over, pulled out 2 kitchen wipes and vigorously wiped the oil stains on the cooking table. A few beads of sweat on her forehead slid down the curve of her face. She straightened up and wiped the sweat with her exposed wrist. Dianan's stomach made a loud rumbling sound, like thunder. Auntie heard the sound and turned around to see her. Dianan, you're finally willing to leave the door. Auntie almost cried with joy. Auntie, do you have anything to eat? I'm so hungry, she asked lightly. Look at me, I've forgotten that you can't eat well every day. I'll make something delicious for you right away. The fridge is full of your favorite dishes, you wait, they'll be ready soon. And he eagerly arranged. I heard from your mother that you took a break from school at home and haven't been to school for a long time. Are you in a good mood? It's okay, I don't want to go to school anymore. I review at home more freely and my efficiency is much higher than at school. And he nodded and smiled at her, saying, as long as you're happy, after all, you're good at studying and there's nothing to worry about. She then took out the pork ribs from the fridge to thaw them. Have you been out of touch with Yanhai for a long time? And he paused, but couldn't help but ask. Chapter 10. Why I Am Always Wrong. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Dianan's throat was choked by Yanhai's words, and she held her breath. The kitchen was so quiet that there was no sound, and she felt her whole body almost engulfed by this quiet space. After a while, she regained her senses, readjusted her breathing rate, and pretended to be calm, saying, I haven't talked to him for a long time. You did the right thing. And he said confidently, he has no face to talk to you again. Dianan felt a complete sense of relief in her heart. For the first time, she felt as if the heavy burden on her heart had been lifted, but this feeling was too unfamiliar to her, so easy that it made her feel uneasy. She took out a box of coconut juice and a small cup of coffee concentrate from the refrigerator, mixed them with a coconut latte, and slowly poured the liquid into a milky green mug. And will he still come to pick you up after work today? Don't worry, he won't come. If he wants to come in, I'll let him get out. I want to kick him out of the house. And he gritted her teeth in anger. Dianan chuckled lightly, feeling that her laughter seemed impolite, and instantly put away her smile. He's actually not as wicked and unforgivable as you say, she explained. To be honest, in school, he treats me very well compared to others. And he heard her say this and quickly put down the dishes in her hand, taking off the household gloves. She couldn't help but grab Dianan's shoulder and embrace her tightly. Due to he being too excited, she didn't grasp the strength of her embrace well, which made her suffocate. She said in a suppressed voice, you don't have to do this. I'm fine, don't worry. She withdrew from Yanhai's embrace and thought to herself, he's not really a bad person, but I always feel heartbroken because of him. On the day of the college entrance examination, everyone walked into the examination room wearing school uniforms. At the moment Dianan sat down in the examination room, he took off his school uniform jacket. She didn't look around, and as soon as the bell rang, she began to concentrate on writing on the exam paper, brushing her brush as if it were a godsend. Yanhai sat in the 2 rows to the right behind her, and he dared not lift his head from the moment he saw her enter the exam room. Fortunately, this awkward feeling did not affect his performance. The final exam was finally over, and she left the crowd as if there were no one around, with people staring at her like they were looking at a lunatic. During the period when she was not preparing for exams at school, there were rumors that she had suffered from severe depression and was locked up in a mental hospital in the city by her family. These smears had dissipated like smoke to her at this moment, and she soon had no involvement with this school. Shortly thereafter, her total score ranked second in her grade, with Yanhai ranking first. She was drinking coffee at the dining table in the living room, browsing through the grades of various subjects on her transcript. I'm laughing to death, ha ha ha. You even claim to be a top student, and your score on the exam is not as high as our servant's son. Sun pointed at her score and laughed wildly. Dianan glanced at his bewildered and crazy expression with a sideways glance, and shook her head helplessly. In the future, she no longer needs to be careful with her brother's magical behavior every day. Her life in her hometown, this small city, is about to turn over, because her grades are more than enough to be admitted to the philosophy major at a City Day University. At the thought of this, she couldn't help but burst out laughing, which completely angered Sun. She didn't bother to pay attention to his incompetent and angry ghost appearance, and leisurely carried coffee and sliced kiwi upstairs. As expected, 2 weeks later she received an admission letter from Dae University, and she ranked first in the philosophy major. After his brother learned this news, he went to the bar to get drunk for several days. Suddenly, he realized that his sister was about to escape his clutches, and instantly felt that life was boring. The proud mother arranged dozens of academic banquets for Shuangjie, invited relatives who were not usually in contact, and promised her to buy a standalone villa near the university in front of them, making it convenient for her to go to and from school. Su-sun was once again struck by the shocking news and left the banquet on the spot. On this day, Dianan was packing her luggage in the bedroom, and in a few days she was going to report to Dae University. She looked at the wardrobe and calculated which clothes would be suitable for her. Then, she casually placed a customized silver mocha pot, an imported leafless hair dryer, a limited edition French tea set adorned with gold border flowers, and a luxurious silk pillowcase given to her by her mother in her luggage box. At this moment, Su-sun burst in drunk. He watched her slowly packing up, so angry that he clenched his right hand into a fist and glared at her with a strange and fierce gaze. "Are you too indecisive? Look at your arrogant appearance at the banquet," he roared, his arms bulging with veins and trembling uncontrollably. "What does this have to do with me? It's because you don't have any decent skills to let Mom handle it." She looked down at him and said disdainfully. Su-sun's teeth trembled with anger as he bit on the knuckles of his middle finger and thought to himself, "You're just temporarily escaping home. As long as you're still my sister, I'll torture you forever. You can never be relieved. It's as if I really care about how beautiful you are." His mouth loosened his middle finger and he retorted disdainfully. He was about to teach her a lesson when he heard footsteps coming upstairs. "It turns out that Mom has come back." Dianan said softly, "Please calm down. Mom has been working hard enough lately, so let's just stop playing around, okay? Brother." She rarely calls Su-sun brother. He seems to have been influenced by this sudden address, hesitating and nodding to agree. His anger has also dissipated, and he said in a relaxed tone, "Okay, I won't argue with you for now. Don't provoke me in the future, otherwise we'll settle old and new accounts together." My mother came to Dianan's bedroom and happened to see Su-sun coming out of the room. She was about to ask him where he was going later, but he quietly bumped into her shoulder and hurriedly ran down the stairs. "Did you make your brother unhappy again?" Mother scolded Dianan with a displeased expression on her face. "Why do you always think I'm the one who provoked him? Don't you know his character?" Dianan asked in frustration. "You will soon be the person going to college, an adult. Mom hopes you can make some peace with your brother. Your brother is a bit narrow-minded, so don't be too narrow-minded with him." Mom approached her and gently stroked her shoulder with her hand. Her mother rarely made such intimate gestures towards her, and her cold and hard heart was melted by the warmth of her mother's palm, so she silently nodded in agreement. As the mother watched her daughter put one thing after another into her suitcase, she couldn't help but feel a feeling in her heart. "This girl really doesn't make me worry. She is always so rebellious and restless, and besides resisting my various decisions, she doesn't listen at all. The other daughters are very close to their mothers, but this girl doesn't have any warmth when interacting with her own family. I wonder if it's really my own. Mom, why are you staring at me so strangely?" Dianan asked with a puzzled expression on her face. "You're too sensitive and suspicious yourself, oh. You're really not likable. Mom really doesn't want to be with you for a moment. I'm back at work, remember, don't provoke your brother." Mom sternly reminded her, her eyes turning to the business contract in her hands. After she left, Dianan pushed the door hard and it was slammed shut.